Yeah, because Dr. Gary kept saying, "Oh, there's no proof they engineered this in this lab." Yes, some people think this was an intentional act, but I think the vast majority of people who are thinking lab leak don't think this was intentional. They think that they were doing gain-of-function research in that Wuhan lab on bat coronaviruses to see how dangerous we could make them and how we might combat them, and that something went wrong, that there was a low-level security in this lab. Something went wrong. And while they didn't try to engineer this pandemic, that wound up being the consequence.
Yes, I actually have a very charitable view of the research happening in that lab. So I don't believe that they were intentionally trying to make pandemic pathogens. They tried to do their work in very weak viruses, but I think by accident they might have put in a pandemic feature that made one of these weak viruses capable of starting a human pandemic. And the issue here is that they were doing a lot of this work in the years leading up to the pandemic at a very low biosafety level. So you had asked Bob Gary, was it appropriate for them to do this type of research at BSL-2, and Bob said he thought it was a high enough level of biosafety. That is just not true. So you cannot be working with novel SARS-like viruses at BSL-2. If you do this for several years and you're working with hundreds of these SARS-like viruses, one day you're going to get unlucky.
Right. So what about his point? He was saying all the cases originated around the Huanan market, and that in that market, they found traces of the coronavirus in this particular section where the animals were kept.
There are a few facts that need to be pointed out about this market. So the first thing is that this market is the size of about 10 NFL stadiums. Okay, 10 NFL stadiums, the retail space in that market, and it's located in one of the most densely populated districts in Wuhan City, where most of the elderly people live. It's located right next to the Wuhan CDC and several hospitals, key hospitals in that city. It's also located next to the most highly trafficked metro train station in that city. So by the time the investigators went there, the entire market, 10 NFL stadiums, had been plastered with virus. So Bob Gary says that he thinks that based on the available data, which is very little, he thinks that there's evidence of contamination near the wildlife stores. But if you look at it closely, actually the washrooms in the toilets in that market are right there. So he and his collaborators on this peer-reviewed science paper he keeps pointing to actually admit in the paper itself, we don't have the data, but we're going to make a bunch of assumptions that support our belief that this came from the market, and we're going to tell everyone that we've found the animal at this market. So I think those studies cannot stand if they were truly opened up for open peer review by other scientists.
What do you make of his assertion? Because I said, where's the animal? Where's even one? They tested 80,000 and they're not there. And he said the Chinese got rid of them, in an effort to cover it up, that they didn't want the news narrative to be they came from a lab, which, from the Wuhan market.
So I agree that China now has a stance that they don't want any evidence at all that this virus originated in China. It's an anywhere but here stance. So they're trying to blame it on lobsters from Maine. They're trying to blame it on cold chain from Southeast Asia. They're trying to blame it on salmon from Faroe Islands. This kind of thing. Everyone who sees that knows it's a farce, right? So, but what Bob Gary is saying is that in all of the years, even before the pandemic, the scientists who have been studying the wildlife and the bats all around that area and other parts of China have not been able to find any animals infected with SARS-2-like viruses, except for pangolins far down in South China. They have not found any bats in the area that carry this type of viruses. And so he's saying that all of that evidence must have been covered up. Either that or we have been exceedingly unlucky that suddenly a virus with this furin cleavage site just pops up, boom, and leaves no trace across the rest of China in the years leading up to or after the pandemic. So it requires a massive conspiracy across tons of scientists, wildlife traders, hospitals, like the government. So I think that conspiracy is much less plausible than the lab leak theory.
Well, let's talk about the lab leak theory now and explain to us why you believe, and I understand your initial point, which is there's no definitive evidence in either camp. There's circumstantial evidence and people will draw their own conclusions, but it really is outrageous that we're not having an international open investigation into this with so many people dead. I mean, millions of people dead, 10 plus. In any event, why do you believe that this came from a lab?
So I think that the odds are extremely striking. So in the entire world, this was the only lab that was collecting all of these novel coronaviruses from not just bats, but wildlife in the wildlife trade, from even people in the wildlife trade. So they're actively collecting samples from people who reported illnesses, mysterious illnesses, and they worked in wildlife trade, bringing all these samples up from Southeast Asia and China across 8 countries up into Wuhan city. They had the ability to seamlessly engineer these in the lab, genetically modify them in the lab, leaving no trace of detection. They also had this 2018 pipeline to put furin cleavage sites into SARS-like viruses. So there's only this one lab in the world doing this type of work at not safe conditions, so at a low biosafety condition. And 2 years later, this virus shows up in that city. So you have to investigate. And their behavior has really not been very forthcoming. So these guys said, we're going to put horns on horses. A unicorn shows up in their city. And they describe everything about this unicorn except for the horn. And they don't tell anyone about their plans to put horns on horses until late last year. Someone finally leaked the document from the US government showing that these guys had this plan all this time. And none of them said a word, not even the US collaborators.
All right, when you refer to the plan, are you referring to Peter Daszak's application to the defense, to the Pentagon, asking for funding to do exactly this kind of research, this kind of gain-of-function research on bat coronaviruses?
Yes, and other top virologists have looked at this document too and said this could have plausibly led to the creation of the pandemic virus. So my question is, why aren't we investigating? Why aren't we asking the EcoHealth Alliance and other US collaborators on that grant, what other research happened under this arm of work? Did you actually start doing this work? What were the communications that you got from your Wuhan partners?
Okay, and what about the defense of, well, the Pentagon rejected that. They did not fund that, and so what makes you believe it took place?
So this is another scientifically naive point that Bob Gary made. He said just because they didn't get the money, they couldn't do the work. That is, I think, incorrect on so many levels, because this lab in Wuhan was extremely highly funded. They had so much money pouring in that not getting one grant from DARPA in the US would not have stopped them from doing any work, especially an idea that was very exciting, considered transgressive, most likely able to lead to a high-impact publication. So, and a lot of scientists, when they write these grants, they've usually done some preliminary work already. And the wording in this grant was so specific. It said, we're going to look in all of the viruses we've collected to see if there are any types of rare cleavage sites. And we're going to put these into SARS-like viruses in the lab. So I think that it is wishful thinking on Bob Gary's part. He wishes that they had not done any of this work so that it could have just come from that market.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that's really suspicious is the fact that this virus arrived in humans super efficient and great at being at contagion, great at it, passing from one to another. And that's very rare, as I understand it, with these coronaviruses, SARS coronaviruses. The viruses typically take a long time to get this efficient, this good. And that's why, I was asking him about the humanized mice in the lab, because that is how we understand they were doing it. They were using these humanized mice to make the virus more transmissible. So
Gary and his co-authors, they make some fairly outlandish assertions. They claim that they know that the precursor to the pandemic virus was never worked with in that lab. And my question is, how do you know? Did you have access to their database and you're not sharing it with us? I asked him that. Yeah, there's usually a lag of a few years. Some labs even work on projects for 10 years before publishing. And we know that Wuhan Institute of Virology had a very strict confidentiality protocol. Some of their theses had to be locked for 20 years. So someone's PhD project.
But you heard his answer on that. You heard his answer. They were originally going to do it. They're getting it together, but then they got ticked off and they were like, forget it. You're going to blame us. You're not getting anything.
I don't understand what he means by modernizing an Excel sheet. So, can't you just share the Excel sheet with your US collaborators? The people who gave you millions of dollars over the years to build this database to predict pandemics. So this is another example where I feel like their behavior has been suspicious and not forthcoming, illogical, really.
The holidays, when our waists get bigger and our wallets get smaller. It's the season when most companies want you to spend all your money. But Good Ranchers wants to help you save in a season of spending. Beef prices are estimated to increase another 20% early in 2023, continuing the largest price spike on meat in recent U.S. history. Good Ranchers is letting you lock in your price on all the meat you buy this November when you subscribe during their Black Friday savings. With my code, Megyn, you can get their exclusive Black Friday offer of 2 free Black Angus New York strip steaks. You will inflation-proof your meat budget, get $70 of free USDA choice steaks, and save an additional $25 on every box when you subscribe. Thousands of 5-star reviews show why so many people are ditching the high prices and low quality of their grocery store for Good Ranchers instead. Treat yourself or someone you love to Good Ranchers' award-winning service and quality this holiday season. Remember to visit goodranchers.com/Megyn or just use that code Megyn when you check out to grab their best offer of the year. Black Angus is one of the premium breeds of cattle for high-quality beef, so don't have a normal Black Friday this year. Have yourself a Black Angus Friday with 2 free steaks from Good Ranchers. American meat delivered. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.